Internet, my name is Ace, and do you know what my #1 most favorite thing about video games is? The bosses. Oh, how I love the bosses.
I just love the challenge of an adversary doing everything in its power to stop my progression. The rush of blood blasting through my fingers as I put my skills to the test. The frustration loss brings, causing me to chuck my controller at the nearest wall.
I relish good bosses. You see, I've been playing video games for over 20 years now, so whenever I'm looking for a challenge, I look to the video game bosses to provide it. You might be wondering what this is all about now. Well, you see, I kinda wanted to make a video series talking about different video game bosses. Now you might be thinking, this is where the top 10 list starts, right? Wrong.
I don't think I can make a top 100 list, let alone a top 10. I just like too many bosses. So, I came up with the idea of taking one game, looking at every boss fight in the game, and reviewing them.
That is boss reviews. Now, what is a boss? Well, to the parents at home watching this video to make sure that what their children are watching is safe for them to watch, first off, hello. Second,
a boss is a tougher than average enemy that challenges you at the end of a level or series of levels in a video game. Towards the end of the game, you might also find yourself being challenged by the toughest boss, aka the final boss. In some games, there might only be a final boss. In others, it might be nothing but bosses.
Now, you might be wondering what exactly I'm looking for in a good boss fight. Well, in my opinion, there's two things that I think are vital for a good boss fight. Difficulty and design.
With difficulty, I'm looking to see how hard a boss is based on where it is in the game. You wouldn't want the hardest boss to be your first, right? Nor would you want the last to be the easiest. In my opinion, it's vital that bosses challenge a player based on what they have learned and on how long they have played the game. Ergo, an easier boss in the beginning of the game, challenging you on the basics of gameplay, and a more difficult boss towards the end, testing you on advanced techniques in reaction time.
That's not to say that all video games should be like that. Maybe there's a reason that the first boss is kicking your butt. That's why I think design is also important.
For design, I want to see what the boss fight is, and why it's a boss fight. Where is the boss fight? What is the music? Why is it a boss? Basically, I'm looking to see how this boss stands out against any others in the game. You'd get bored pretty quickly if you fought the same boss multiple times, in similar areas, with similar music, and similar attacks.
I think you get the idea. So, what game will be the first for me to judge its bosses? Well, it's a game that's actually very near and dear to my heart. Donkey Kong Country!
Donkey Kong Country, or DKC, is a Super Nintendo video game starring the classic enemy of Mario, Donkey Kong. This game is quite famous, as it's credited as one of the video games that won Nintendo the console wars back in the 90s.
It's known for its stellar graphics and amazing music, but are Donkey Kong Country's bosses any good? Well, before we find out, let's take a look at how the game plays.
Donkey Kong Country is a 2D platformer starring Donkey Kong and his best friend / nephew, Diddy Kong. The two are on a quest to reclaim their banana hoard, which was stolen by King K. Rool and his Kremlings. The game controls similar to 2D platformers at the time. You can walk left and right, as well as run. If an enemy touches you, you lose a life, unless you have another Kong with you, which you can get by breaking DK barrels. Both Kongs can jump, which is your main method of dealing with baddies. Another move for dealing with baddies is Donkey and Diddy's roll and cartwheel. It's also possible for both Kongs to pick up barrels and throw them. There are some other things you can do, like jump on tires to jump higher, but other than that, the other things you can do in the game aren't really required for the boss fights. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at our first boss. Deep within the jungles on DK Isle hops our first boss of the game. He's a big bad beaver named Very Naughty. Very Naughty is a simple boss that tries attacking you by jumping from one side of the room to the other. To damage him, all you have to do is jump onto his head. He'll then laugh and begin jumping farther towards you. Jump on his head 5 times to knock him out. Now, would I call this a good boss? No, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It's very easy to beat Very Naughty. Since all you have to do is jump on his head, you can just jump on him, wait for him to laugh, and then jump onto his head again. You'll have him beaten in 15 seconds flat. Now, while I personally think this makes the boss fight too easy, I'm not going to complain about it. It's the first boss of the game, so it's supposed to teach the player how the other boss fights will go. For design, Very Naughty is what I'd call a giant boss. He's just a bigger version of a normal enemy, the first enemy you see in the game actually. Giant bosses can be okay if there's something interesting about them, but unfortunately, Very Naughty's most interesting trait is that he hops instead of walks. There are some things I do like though. The arena for one is pretty interesting. I've never seen a boss fight take place inside a giant pile of fruit. The music's pretty good too. It's got a nice menacing theme that works well for a boss fight. If it wasn't the first boss in the game, I'd say it's bad, but since it is, I'll give it a pass on its difficulty. Very Naughty just barely makes itself an okay boss fight. Past the jungles, we find the Monkey Mines, where our next boss resides. He's the master of all Neckies, Master Nikki. No. This boss is so big, only his head and neck can fit into the room. Master Nikki starts out the fight by entering the giant pile of bananas and spitting out a giant coconut at the Kongs. After a second, he'll then retreat and reappear in a different location, spitting out another coconut. To damage this vulture, you just have to jump on his head after he launches a coconut. However, as he appears at different heights, you'll have to jump onto the tire in the middle of the room to reach his head. Damage him 5 times and Master Nikki will be a master no more. For difficulty, I'd say Master Nikki starts out harder than the last boss, as you actually have to wait for him to attack before you can attack him, which is good. But it's missing the one thing that Very Naughty had. Escalation. When you hurt the first boss, he would increase the distance of his jump, while this boss does nothing at all to become more difficult. Which is why I feel this boss's difficulty just kinda matches the previous one overall. As far as design, well, there's some things I like and things I don't like. For example, the arena and music are the same, which is fine and all, but it doesn't really make the fight more interesting. As for things I like, it is kinda cool to see the boss so big that can only fit its head and neck into the arena. All in all, I find that Master Nikki falls short in everything it does. It's not more difficult than the last boss and barely interesting, which in my opinion, makes it a bad boss. Well, so far these bosses haven't really done anything interesting. Hopefully the boss of DK Isle's forest can spice things up. Now, all around the island, you'll find one of Donkey Kong Country's more famous baddies, giant bees named Zinger, and they come in 4 fabulous colors. It turns out these guys come from the mother of all bees, Queen Bee. Queen Bee is a giant version of a Zinger. She's not so big that you can't jump over her, as she flies across the floor, walls, and ceiling of the room. To damage the queen, you have to pick up a barrel and hit her with it. She'll turn red with anger and start zigzagging up and down towards you. Avoid her by running around the room and underneath her until she turns back to her normal yellow self. The more you damage her, the faster she'll fly around the room and zigzag when she's invincible. Damage her 5 times and this queen will rule no more. Is this boss the best so far in the game? Well, actually I think it is. The difficulty I find is just right. It's obvious as to what you have to do since the barrels spawn inside the room, and I like how the boss becomes invincible and then chases you around. It gets faster the more damage you do to it, meaning you have to time when you go underneath the boss so it doesn't trap you against the wall. It's just a really fun and frantic fight. For the design, there's nothing really special about the stage or music, and it is just another giant version of a normal enemy, but I do think it's pretty interesting on how different the fight can be depending on which Kong you use. With both Kongs, you can throw the barrel forward as intended, but with Donkey, you can stand underneath Queen Bee when she goes down the wall and have her run into the barrel in your hands. Diddy can do the same, but holds it like a shield, meaning he has to hit her when she's on the ground. I also like how she turns red with anger, which makes it obvious that she's invincible. Honestly, in my opinion, this is easily just a good boss. As we near the top of DK Isle, the weather takes a turn to the cold side, where we find a boss that isn't very naughty, but really naughty. Really naughty is a simple boss that tries attacking you by jumping from one side of the room to the other. To damage him, all you have to do is jump onto his head. He'll then laugh, jump high into the air, and try to land on you. He'll then begin jumping farther in the direction he's facing. Every time Really Naughty is damaged, he'll increase the number of times he jumps high and the distance of his normal jumps. Jump on his head 5 times to knock him out. I may find giant bosses okay, but palette swapped versions of previous bosses that happen to be giant bosses is where I cross my line. Really Naughty is very similar to his previous counterpart. He is more difficult as he jumps farther than the first boss and has invincible high jumps as well, but it takes just double the time of the first boss to beat him. His massive increase in distance and jumps might catch new players off guard, but Really Naughty is really not that hard. For design, I mean, it's a clone of a previous uninteresting boss in the same room with the same music. There's nothing interesting about this fight at all. This is just another bad boss. If there's one place I wasn't expecting to see on an island shaped like an ape's head, it was an industrial wasteland. All I can say is that the boss for this location sure is fitting. Dumb Drum. A giant oil drum that begins the fight by attempting to crush the Kongs. It then shakes itself and releases 2 Kremlings for the Kongs to fight. After the baddies are defeated, the boss will increase the number of times it slams into the ground, the speed it slams into the ground, and releases different, more challenging baddies for the Kongs to fight. After the 5th wave of baddies, Dumb Drum lives up to its name by slamming to the ground and blowing itself up. This is one fight where I feel the difficulty and design actually work really well together. I wouldn't say it's hard to dodge Dumb Drum itself, but the enemies it throws out actually present different challenges based on which Kong you are using. For Diddy, it's a bit harder as he can't jump onto the clumps that get thrown out. And the armies, well, Diddy has to jump onto them twice, which is actually pretty difficult since there's 2 of them, and they're pretty fast. It's easier for Donkey Kong to deal with the enemies, but he's more likely to get hit by them as he's a bit bigger than Diddy. Even though it isn't hard to dodge the boss, I must say I kinda like how you just dodge and let the boss hurt itself. So I think I actually gotta hand it to Dumb Drum and call it a good boss fight. Sure, it seems stupid, but even if it's stupid, it's still a fun fight. Deep in the Chimp Caverns lies another giant pile of bananas guarded by the penultimate boss, Master Nikki Sr. What looks like Master Nikki, sounds like Master Nikki, and fights like Master Nikki? Master Nikki Sr., that's who. This boss is so big, only his head and neck can fit in the room, like Master Nikki. Starts out the fight by entering the giant pile of bananas and spitting out a giant coconut at the Kongs, like Master Nikki. And to damage him, you just have to jump on his head after he launches a coconut, like Master Nikki. The only unique thing about this boss is that he'll increase the number and speed of the coconuts he spits at you the more you damage him. After jumping on him 5 times, you no longer have to fear giant coconuts. Master Nikki Sr. is honestly one of the most boring bosses to fight. He's only slightly harder than the boss he's cloned off of, and that was the second boss. He's not hard at all, and design-wise there's nothing interesting at all. Same arena, same music, same boss. He'd be better off as Master Nikki Sr. This clone of a bad boss is just as bad as the original. So far, Donkey Kong Country, in my opinion, has had 2 good bosses, 1 okay boss, and 3 bad bosses. It's not looking too good for this video game and its boss designs, but maybe it can pull it all together with one final boss. As each boss gets beaten in DKC, you'll see something off in the distance coming closer and closer to the island. Turns out it's a ship, where the leader of the Kremlings, King K. Rool, holds the last of Donkey Kong's banana horde. Starting off the fight, King K. Rool throws his crown, leaving his head unprotected. Jumping onto his head will hurt him, and he'll run across the ship to the other side. He'll increase the speed of his throw, and the number of times he runs across the ship, the more you damage him. After jumping on his head 3 times, the king will change things up. he'll begin to jump into the air and land on the other side of the ship. This will cause cannonballs to fall from the sky. After they travel from one side of the ship to the other, he'll throw his crown again. Damaging during this phase will cause the boss to increase the speed of his throw, as well as the number of times the cannonballs fall onto the boat. After damaging him 3 more times, King K. Rool will fall down in defeat. But it ain't over. Some fake credits will play, and the king will get back up and begin to hop from one side of the boat to the other. When he reaches the end, he'll throw his crown. Jumping on his head during this phase will increase the speed of his throw, the number of times he hops from one side to the other, as well as the distance of his jumps will decrease. After jumping on him 3 more times, King K. Rool will finally be defeated. Does this final boss trump all the others? Heck yes! King K. Rool provides the hardest challenge in the game, like he should, since he's the final boss. He also has an amazing song playing during the fight, and an awesome arena. The things he does to attack you are simple, but the escalation is just amazing. He goes from simply trying to run into you, to launching cannonballs from the sky, and shows how cold-blooded he can be by trying to trick you with a fake credits. The music starts off all goofy, with a pirate sea shanty, then escalates right at the perfect time when the boss rams things up with the cannonballs. Plus, it's so cool seeing the area you were in for most of the game off in the distance. King K. Rool is definitely the best boss of this game, and honestly, I also think he's one of the best final bosses out of all video games. This right here is a very good boss fight. So, out of 7 bosses, we got 3 bad ones, 1 okay boss, 2 good bosses, and 1 very good final boss. Kind of a wild spread, but nothing's perfect. They're all just simple bosses for a simple game.
Well, that's it for the very first boss reviews. Do you guys agree with me, or do you have your own opinion on these bosses? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you guys next time!